I'm Mike Costello, and I'm with the Reverend Iris Freelander. And today we'd like to take a few minutes to talk to you about angels or angelic beings. And depending upon the faith tradition from which you come, you may have ideas and thoughts about angelic beings, what they do, where they are, and have a lot of ideas and thoughts. And so we'd like to share with you some of the thinking that is shared by many people who are involved in the New Thought Christian movement and in metaphysical circles. And so we'll begin by talking about what angelic beings are. And Iris, why don't you begin by helping us with that?
Well, I think angelic beings are a higher state of evolution than humankind. They were created by God the whole, and they're here to help us. They are attuned to God's own energy. They don't have free will, as mankind has free will. And in being attuned to God, they work according each to their own assignment. It's a wonderful thing that we have all those angelic beings helping us.
Let's talk a little bit about guardian angels, because
Good.
people can usually, and when we talk about angelic beings, we're talking about a multiplicity of beings on the inner that
Yes.
have angelic nature.
Yes.
But of course, we're most accustomed, I think, those of us from traditional faith backgrounds, of knowing probably guardian angels and the archangels. But
Yes.
let's talk a little bit about guardian angels.
Well, the guardian angels are, many think they're the feminine aspect of angel in the angel kingdom, and many think that they're either masculine or feminine. Of course, angels really are androgynous, so it wouldn't matter which way we see them. But they are assigned to us or assign themselves to us. Every group has a guardian angel before they reach a certain degree of development. We're a part of a group spirit, just as the animal kingdom is governed by group angelic beings. One angel will be over a group of animals, and they are over humankind souls too, until we reach a certain state of development. And then a guardian will assign herself to us or be assigned to us, and they stay with us, I believe, until we reach a certain stage of development, which would be the third degree of initiation. And then they no longer have to stay with us.
But they continue to be accessible, isn't
Right.
that?
They're with us constantly, day and night, constantly, and they're just a thought away, and they help us ever so much. And I know one guardian was able to communicate with the lady whom he was guardian to, and she asked him, "When did I give you the worst time of your since in this incarnation?" And he said, "Well, when she was in a near accident, and he had to dematerialize her car. She was in her automobile with 3 other people. He had to dematerialize them and the automobile, take it over to the berm, and then rematerialize it. And he did that in the wink of an eye. And they didn't know how they got across 3 lanes of traffic to have their cars settle in on the berm, because all that traffic was so strong, so swift. And so that was one proof that, yes, what he was saying was true, her guardian was saying was true, because there's no way that car could have gotten over there.
Isn't it interesting that almost all faith traditions feel comfortable with the reality of angels or the symbolism of angels? And in our own traditional Christian churches, is one of probably the earliest things we teach our children.
Yes, yes. Well, one, it's very dear and precious to us, our guardian angels and our other angels. Of course, there's an angel of the home, there's an angel for every, as you said before, there are bajillions of different types of angels. But it's so dear to know that, yes, they are accessible to us. And yes, there are those on the inner planes. And I think in every, as you said, in every faith, angels are considered and honored. And so it's because of that, probably, then they're more widely accepted by everyone, just because they're so widely accepted.
More universally,
Yes.
In New Thought, of course, we have different and varied ideas and thoughts and teachings about angels. And of course, all of the information that we have in all of our faith traditions are revealed from the inner to people on the physical or earth plane. And certainly the teaching about angels is a part of that. But in New Thought churches and fellowships, so often we become much more esoteric, or much more deep, if you will, in the understanding of angels, because we think and believe that they're so much an integral part of the invisible side of life. And I know you worked for many years and studied with Flower Newhouse, and Flower had some teachings and thought about angels from a metaphysical standpoint, didn't she?
Yeah, she felt that that was one thing she came in to do, to bring through the reality and truth about the angelic kingdom to people, to humankind. And she wrote several wonderful books describing the angelic beings and describing the various types of angels. And it was a marvelous work that she did. And of course, the Catholic Church is to be commended in that way for keeping alive this information about the angelic kingdom.
Angels are a big part of Christianity and a big
Yes.
part of Islam and of the major faiths of the
Yes,
world.
of every faith. And it's such a wonderful thing that we do know of them because we can see them. And I think of course, I think the line between the third dimension in which we're living and the fourth dimension, the next, is finer and finer all the time. And more people are seeing angels.
Let's
It's just
explain
amazing.
that dimension, the third and fourth dimension, and what they are. So
Well,
people,
it's consciousness. We live in the third state of third dimension of consciousness, and then we shift quickly into the fourth. And I think we go back and forth even when we're yet in these bodies, and we're average people such as you and I. I think that we sometimes shift into the fourth dimension, and sometimes then and come back. But and we momentarily are in that dimension. But there is a train of thought that we're going into the fourth dimension totally within a very short time, before the end of the century for sure.
if that happened, what would that entail? What would happen?
Well, it just means that we would be able to see, feel, and uh, all our senses would be heightened and would be total and complete, and would be able to see not only with our physical eyes, but we'd see with our third eye. We'd see clairvoyantly. We would hear clairaudiently. We would be clairsentient. We would feel clairsentiently. So not only would we have the five senses that we experience on Earth bodies, but we would also have those other senses opened up to us. And more people are developing those states right now.
And when we're able to access that fourth dimension, we're talking not about some place that's far off and in the distance, although it is immense, just as the physical world in which we live is immense. And we know that because we live in a universe that is
Yes.
larger than our community or even our earth plane. But we're talking about a dimension that exists here and cohabitates the same space
Right.
in which we are.
Simultaneously. And that boggles people's mind. They can't conceive that, and I find it hard to conceive too, but I know it's true, that we're living simultaneously in those worlds. And it's just such a fine line, as you say in your wonderful memorial services that you conduct, and you're asked to so often just because they are so inspiring, that we just step. It's just one step.
And we step out of this life into the next, but we don't really go anywhere.
Right.
We just change, or we are transformed. And of course, Scripture tells us that it happens in the twinkling of an eye.
Yes.
And so that quickly we put off the physical and we move into a new dimension. One of the things that we talk about so often is people, especially after deaths, but not necessarily after the death of a loved one, but occasionally, quite often, more than occasionally, people will say they have a vision. And maybe it's a vision ever so briefly of someone that they knew or loved. Perhaps it's a vision of someone that is already, or is still on the earth plane somewhere else. Perhaps it's an angelic presence. Maybe it's the smell of flowers. Or we have all of these senses that come to our consciousness of something that we know isn't tangibly there with us.
Yes.
And yet, in fact, it is.
Yes.
Because we are surrounded all of the time by an invisible world. And that invisible world is made up of angelic beings and the spiritual reality of life and those loved ones that have gone on and the power and grace of God. And all of that is right here in the studio. It's in the room where people are watching this program. It's everywhere present. It's that omnipresence that everyone has talked about in Christianity, but in New Thought has been so much a fundamental and focal part of our teaching.
Yes, and if we could just remember that those presences are around us all the time, I think we'd be more we'd be more comforted, and we wouldn't be as fear-filled. I know when I was a very small child, I could see my guardian angel, and I thought it was Jesus at the time. And I thought, he really watches over me, and he's really with me. But then I realized later it was my guardian angel whose face I was seeing, and they're with us all the time. And they guide us, protect us, guard us, but they don't usurp our free will. And they can help us in ever so many ways and do. They help us, inspire us, and transform us, help to transform us, and it comes from within. It's interesting, isn't it? It all comes from within, comes from within us.
Within us, and it is the outflow and the inflow that comes into us and goes out from us that connects us to that unseen world
Yes,
and to those angelic beings. And
yes,
it's so tremendously important that we have an understanding of that dimension and an understanding of those angelic beings, even though they're not, we're not seeing them. Yet we know they're there. We feel
yes,
their presence.
yes. And very often we do see them. And more, again, more and more people are seeing angelic beings. And, you know, I've had so many people relate to me stories where they've been helped by someone and suddenly they have a need and suddenly this person appears and helps them and then disappears. And I keep hearing, it just seems that I'm hearing a new story every week almost of something like that. And I remember you mentioned Flower Newhouse earlier. She and her husband were traveling by automobile one time out in a lonely, deserted area, and they had a flat tire. They didn't have another tire, or her husband, I don't remember what the problem was, but they're having quite a problem with that flat tire. And a young man appeared, and he was with a truck. He seemed, suddenly he and his truck were right there, and so he helped them and then disappeared. And her husband Lawrence turned to offer him money, and he had gone. And so they didn't hear the car. Well, that would be an angelic being.
The other thing that angelic beings provide for us, and we talk very, very often in New Thought about this, is that ideas are themselves angels.
Yes.
And that God's messenger to us and from us is in the form of thought, in the form of ideas, is really a transference of angels. And so we think often of an angelic being as a winged, beautiful being, and that certainly can take on, they certainly can take on that presence. But that in our lives, when we have an idea, when we have a guidance, when we have inspiration, when we get directed to do something, that those angelic beings are constantly bringing information back and forth. And if it were not for them, and now we're talking about something that even transcends the physical form, and so that angelic beings are that essence of mind and thought, or actually the essence of thought that goes between the mind of God and our human mind.
Wonderful, wonderful point. That reminds me that at our Wednesday evening church service, we see the angels of prayer, and they take the light that's created through the prayer, healing time, and they take it to where we've directed it and where it's most needed. And we know that that's the way it works. But those angels of prayer are in every church. They're in every home where people are praying. They respond by a thought, and all angels do, of any type. And this is why when we need, it's just like the warrior angels come to our aid when we're having trouble, like on the freeway. There's so many ways that they come to help us. And wherever there's a need, there's an angel to fulfill that need. And if we believe more fully, then they're more accessible to us because we're calling them to us. It's through our own reaching out to them mentally that they respond, because how else could they? They're not going to infringe on our free will. So if we don't ask for their help, then they're not going to be forthcoming.
And certainly a beginning point is to acknowledge the fact that they're there.
Yes, yes, that is very important. And to be grateful. Gratitude is one of the greatest things we can ever offer. And so we can be grateful for these wondrous helpers. And you mentioned in the beginning of our talk about the archangels, and that is a subject that is very exciting and wonderful, because those great archangels are God-like in their development and in their capabilities. And then the angelic kingdom came from the archangels, and then mankind came after that. And so it's like we're in those three different gradations.
You mentioned that they're helpers, and I think that's a wonderful way to describe angelic beings. They are our helpers, aren't
Yes, yes, totally, 100%. And again, we just have to ask for them. And you know, the Lord Christ said, "Whatsoever you shall ask in prayer, believing, ye shall receive." Well, that's the key. We have to ask, because again, God gave us humankind free will. If we don't ask, then they're not going to infringe on our free will. So we need to ask. And I've heard people say, "Well, I don't bother God with trivia," or they don't bother God with certain small things. Well, I think there's nothing too important to bother God with, because there are all those wonderful helpers on the inner who would help us with any problem we have, and nothing is too small. And again, the Lord Christ pointed that out, that every hair on your head is numbered. If the sparrow, there's so many different Bible verses that describe how God is constantly with us. We're fully within His sight constantly.
And with that constant presence, his messengers and our messengers, our helpers, are always surrounding us and enfolding us and coming
Yes,
to our aid.
yes. That's a wonderful term, messengers. And there are the harbinger angels, and they are bright messengers, and that's a lovely term.
And of course, in Scripture, we know the best story, probably, or analogy of the angels and light is the angel of the Lord declared unto Mary
Yes.
when she was with child. And then we, again, in the Gospel of Luke, see that wonderful pastoral story where we're told that the angels told the shepherds in the fields and proclaimed. And so at Christmas, we see this wonderful picture of these angelic beings, and really they are proclaimers,
Yes.
and they do bring messages. And then again, we see the angel at the tomb who
Yes.
greeted those who had come to anoint the body. And angels are constantly present, and they're messengers. They're guarding people. In the Old Testament, we have so many instances where the angels even went into battle.
Yes.
And supported battle for righteousness' sake. And so that presence guides and directs. And often we think, well, angels would only be holy and pious. And of course, holiness and piety have to do with states of consciousness, not with behavior. Our behavior, it responds to our thoughts. And if our thoughts are holy and pious, then our behavior, it becomes holy and pious. And so it is with the angels as well.
Yes, and they're more inclined to be near us if we are open to them. And if we are living the life in that way, then they can use us to do their work. We would be their hands and their thoughts here, and express their thoughts here on earth. And I think we're often inspired by our angels I'm sure that you feel sometime when you're speaking at the church, at any service, that you are inspired by those on the inner plane.
Certainly, and those on the inner and the angelic beings are constantly providing us with information, with guidance, with direction. And I believe that in our most difficult time, they're there and trying desperately, but we stop the circuit because we're not receptive to them. And so then their input or their guidance or their direction or their answer simply doesn't come.
Yes. Well, we're doing that course of study of the material by Dr. Caroline Mace, and she tells the story of a lady named Ruth. Dr. Mace was giving a workshop in Mexico. She walked out on the balcony, and there was a lady sitting there in a wheelchair, and she was thinking, my God, I'd hate to be in that wheelchair. And the lady had her back to Dr. Mace, and she said, I know you're thinking that you'd hate to be in this wheelchair. She said, I accept it. And so Dr. Mace said, guilty as charged. And so she talked with her about it. Ruth, the patient in the wheelchair, said, I'll come around here and I'll talk with you if you like. And she told her that she had been born into a Orthodox Jewish family, and her family never prepared her for the fact. Her family prepared her that she would grow up to be married and have children. That's what she was to do. She did. And she had 2 children and was happily married. They didn't prepare her that her husband would die. He died at a very young age. She had no way to support her children and herself very easily, so she often stole things to help support herself and her children. So then her angel appeared to her one day and said that she wanted to show her an analogy, and she showed her a facsimile of herself wrapped in rubber bands, and the rubber bands were wrapped so tightly around her body that it was awfully miserable looking. And she said, those are your fears. Her angel told her, those are your fears. And she said, would you like to get rid of them? And she handed her some scissors, and she said, here, cut. Now, as you know, and you teach, everything is symbolic. So this was symbolic. She handed her the scissors, and Ruthie cut the bands from around her body, and then she felt free in her own body. And the angel said, Ruthie, Ruthie, do you realize what a hard time you've given us, that this is what you look like to us, with all those fears wrapping her? Now, they worked with her. I think this is a wonderful story because it tells so many different facets of what we have been discussing. And so then her angel said, I have to tell you that something terrible is going to happen to you in the future. but you will be able to overcome it and be and live a happy life. And you're going to be in a wheelchair during the end part of your life. And so Ruth, she said, "Can you think you can handle that?" And Ruth said, "Will you be there?" And the angel said, "I'll always be with you. I've been with you, and I'll always be with you. There'll not be a moment I won't be with you." And she said, "I can handle anything then. I can handle it." And so she said, "So it doesn't bother me that I'm in this wheelchair."
Mm.
It was an interesting thing, too, that the way she had the vision of her angel, her daughter had married a Buddhist, and she said to her daughter, "I don't understand you. I sacrificed everything in life to give you a good Jewish home, an Orthodox Jewish home, and now you've married a Buddhist, and I think you are on drugs too." And so the girl said, "Aren't you?" And she said, "Sometimes I do. Sometimes I do take drugs." And she said, "What do you take?" And the girl said, "LSD." And Ruthie said, "I want some. Get some for me." So it's when she took that drug that she had the experience of her angel appearing to her. And so she had that experience and was able to live a handicapped life in the wheelchair very happily the rest of her life. And isn't it a wonderful thing that her angel was able to appear to her and tell her?
Hmm. And that guidance came to her and she acted upon it.
Right,
Yeah.
right. And she honored the fact that she knows her guardian is there every moment, but she had to have this proof that she's there and had to be told. But we know that the guardian is always there with us. And we can say this to our listeners that your guardian is always there with you. So if we could just remember that, we can be freed of fear the way Ruthie was freed of her fears. And fear, as you teach so eloquently, is the problem of life, the problem.
The problem, because we believe it to be real when in fact it is not real.
Yeah.
But we talk in the last few minutes that we have here about how it is that we can attune ourselves to those angels. And one of the processes that we need to go through, is to begin to open ourselves to that reality. Is
Yeah.
that the
Yes.
good beginning point?
Yes, it is. And some people, it's a, as you know, we can use all different kind of affirmations, and I know you have us do affirmations a great deal at the church, and it's a wonderful help. Well, there's no better help for attuning than just an affirmation. And we can say, "I know God is within me," because Jesus told us the kingdom of God is within, and in other religions they're taught that too. So whatever is meaningful to the person who would be involved in trying to gain that state of consciousness, then affirm it and believe in the heart. Just believe in their heart that it's so. And of course, to me, deep breathing is one of the best. I've been teaching meditation now for 30 years, and I see people go into meditation and have a wonderful meditation if they do their deep breathing first. And that's very important because it relaxes the body, and it's when we're relaxed that we're able to have our best meditation.
It helps us too to detach.
Yes.
Which is so important.
Important.
And if we focus, and it's always true of the dynamic of human mind and of our inner knowing, that we need to detach from what we believe to be real. And of course, as we go into a meditation, the important aspect of meditation is to detach from the physical.
Yeah.
And that cleansing breath, which is actually cleansing because
Yeah.
it removes us from the earth plane, really in our consciousness and in our awareness, and it opens the way. But meditation is a tremendous, wonderful resource for becoming aware of the angelic beings and also being receptive to their teaching.
Yes, I think it's the most wonderful way that any of us can treat ourselves to this wondrous being who might show herself to us.
Now, some people, especially those from traditional backgrounds and who have no experience or no awareness of meditation, may begin the process with prayer.
Yeah.
Which is verbal prayer, a recitation of prayer, which can be used much like a mantra or simply to center the individual in a spiritual sense. But then moving from prayer into meditation really will open the ability that one has to acknowledge and accept and receive the messages from the angelic realm.
Exactly. And if I could offer any admonition, it would be don't have expectations, just accept and flow. Because when people have expectations, they think they're not doing well. And of course, we can meditate for many years and still we don't have really perfect meditations and we don't attune ourselves as well as we would like. So certainly someone who's just beginning to meditate is going to be disappointed at times. We're all disappointed at times. But if they don't have false expectations, then they can be more easily attuned, because the false expectations creates the barrier.
Certainly, and expecting to see angels
Yes.
appearing and trumpets sounding, and I think that's a very important lesson for that we're sharing with our listeners, and that
Yeah.
is when you begin the meditation process and when you begin to open yourself to the angelic beings, don't accept or
Yeah.
don't expect, and be open and receptive, and your needs will be met.
That was it. Assume you know nothing, and as you just said, accept.
Mhm.
And detach and release.
Mhm.
And if we can do that, and we can, then we'll have good meditations. And a good meditation is just attuning ourselves to divine energy, and afterwards feeling refreshed and renewed. And that's the way you know you had a good
Very good.
meditation.
And then the last aspect of meditation or attuning oneself with angelic beings in the angelic realm is to give thanks for that presence and to constantly give thanks for that presence in
Yeah.
all circumstances and
And in
situations.
everything, give thanks.
Mhm.
That is so. That is such an important lesson, the gratitude. Because if we express gratitude instead of asking for things,
Mhm.
then things are going to come ever so much more fully.
And we become more and more receptive to these to the ideas and to the truth. And in the last half hour, Reverend Freelander and I have been sharing with you ideas and thoughts about angelic beings and angels in your life and in our life. We hope that you found this information to be useful, and we look forward to seeing you next time.
Confident living rights every wrong. Dynamic power helps me be strong. Confident living comforts my heart. From such a blessing I can't depart. Confident living helps me expand visions of value, the kingdom at hand. Confident living, talent to win, gift of the Spirit moves from within. Confident